The agenda today, we're going to give you a bit of background, what we've done so far. Hello. Some of the challenges we've had, and also open up for frequently asked questions that we've kind of prompted some of the questions and we'll answer. But of course, we'll open up questions to the floor at different points of the meeting. After the coffee break, we're going to go deep into the weeds, the bit that Shelley loves.
I'm going to explain it all.
And we're going to talk about exactly how we've done some of the work we've done. That will be with a team who's done a hell of a lot of work, and it's really thanks to them that we're here, really. We'll talk about how do you do content requests, what the future is. But the main thing we're here for is for the community and to get you all involved and be part of this process. And ask us the questions. It's a new thing. We've not done this before. How do we use it? How are you going to use it? And so on. Recording's in progress, which is another start. So, yay! There we go. There are the slides. That's the agenda. So now we've explained it. You've got the luminaries beside me and me, but we're here. Some of the team are here as well, and we'll be speaking later. And a whole load of people behind who are not here, unfortunately, but have helped out. But we'll be talking between us. We're trying to tag team it. We'll see how well the tag team goes, but it should be fine. We've had quite a few meetings between two organizations recently to work through this. And so, this is kind of the town hall. We're bringing this out into the open. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Shelley and Marjorie between them, and I'll be the next, just say next, I'll go next.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. Awesome number here. I'm so excited that we can show you kind of what we got and let you, poke holes in it, ask questions, give suggestions, all of those things. We're really looking forward to it. So a little bit on the background, especially for those that are new. We've been talking about this kind of, I think, we've been talking about a collaboration with LOINC for the last couple of years on how we needed to change what we were doing with the previous collaboration that we had. I think you've heard today that everybody is it's about implementation now. How do we really use the SNOMED CT, and how does it interact with the other standards that we use within our countries, within our organizations? And so very exciting when Marjorie organization agreed to do something different with us, and we talked about what that would look like as two organizations, and really, I would say probably one of the strongest collaborations that we as an organization have right now, and it really could serve as a showcase for others. So what were we trying to do? I mean, in a nutshell, we were trying to really come up with an interoperability solution between the two solutions. So we tried a linkage table years ago in our first collaboration agreement. We tried it, kind of, reviewed it. Nobody was really using it, and we decided we needed to do something different. And that's what this collaboration ended up being. And very exciting for sure. And very much let's do it together in a room. Let's bring the experts and let's do it together in a room. Next slide. So we came up, one of the questions I've been getting around this conference is, we haven't seen anything, or you guys have kind of updated us at each of the meetings, but we haven't really kind of seen any, we haven't really been too involved. And we purposely chose to do it a bit different this time. So one of the directives we were given, certainly from our CEO, was we need to get something. We need to actually get a solution out there sooner rather than later. And so rather than try and figure it out theoretically in a room, we decided that we were going to work together as two organizations and come up with an actual prototype. And based on a whole bunch of knowledge from the two organizations, and then we were going to take it to you guys and let you poke holes in it, because you can actually see something. You can actually look at something. So all of you hopefully saw the preview that came out on Monday of what we're going to be talking about specifically today. And so, we deliberately made that choice. Now you'll see at the end of this, Marjorie and I will talk a little bit about how the community can get more involved now as we move forward to the next stages. So what did we do? It's called the LOINC. The name took a while. It's called the LOINC ontology, and it's a LOINC and SNOMED CT interoperability solution. That's what it is. But it is a LOINC ontology. It is a LOINC product. It is going to be what many of you would know as an extension of SNOMED CT, using our ontological framework, but the LOINC content. It's going to distribute LOINC content to both sets of users, and Regenstrief and LOINC are going to be the ones that distribute it. And it will create SNOMED CT and LOINC codes for all concepts that are shared between the two. So if you are a SNOMED user and you use SNOMED CT codes for things, there will be a LOINC code in SNOMED, and you would pick the SNOMED code. If you're a LOINC user and you know primarily in this area and you want to use the LOINC code, you can pick the LOINC code. So we are going to, so that the technical piece of it you're going to see today. The next stage that you're going to see after is we're going to hopefully work together on some implementation guides, some education, those types of things as well. It's going to be owned and maintained by Regenstrief. So again, this is a real, true collaboration. Yes, we're working together on the solution, but they're going to be owning and maintaining it. And we imagine this collaboration will continue on for years and years. The benefits, we think the benefits are, and you would have heard me say this, I think, in Portugal, is we had so many of our members asking for, in particular, pathology content in particular, and obviously I know that LOINC is more than that, but in particular, pathology content. And we had been given the direction from our MB and our GA to be a terminology integrator, which is not about building the biggest SNOMED CT terminology in the world and just expand, expand, expand. It is about linking and coming up with solutions with the experts in other domain areas, such as Regenstrief and LOINC, such as GMDN and all the other collaborations that we have, and figuring out a solution that everything can work together without us as an organization having to build it all. And so this is going to provide LOINC pathology and lab content in a format for people that do not currently use LOINC and need that in their members, so we're excited about that. It's going to provide an ontological framework to LOINC, which they didn't have previously, and so I think they're excited about that. And then it's going to leverage the LOINC expertise. They are the lab experts. I'm not saying we don't have some in our community, but they have a lot in their community. And we would like to, now we as an organization will be able to leverage that, and hopefully they'll be able to leverage some of our community expertise as well. And then, like we said, I think it's going to set a precedent for how we do collaborations going forward. If this solution works, this extension type solution that you're going to hear all about today, we anticipate that we will be pitching it to other standards organizations that we interact with and saying, we did this with them, it's working really well, aren't you interested in doing something in a similar manner? So I'm excited. There's over 50 people in here. It could get pretty techy, but if I can sit through it, anybody can. So.
Thanks, Shelley. Not too techy, well, a little bit techy. Okay. So I thought we'll give an update of where we've got to. To start with, last week we were here. This is day 8 of the conference marathon for some of us. We had a great time down the road at the Congress Center, World Congress Center? George World Congress Center, that's with the LOINC conference, where Jim and I were invited and lucky to go along and talk about the work that we've done. It looks like we're just death warmed up on the panel, but it was more fun than the photo made it. It's, we did smile sometimes. It is terrible. I was trying to get a better one, but so hopefully we're smiling a lot more now. So, yeah, just in case a camera snap happens.
We were pondering the questions.
Yes, there's a lot of deep thought. So I can see some faces around the room for people who were at the LOINC conference. So some of this will be familiar, and you all have heard some of it. But I think we got some good feedback at that conference. Really useful feedback that we've taken back, and a lot of enthusiasm, I think, in the LOINC community as well about this. So it was a really great 4 days. 4 days. Yeah, I missed the first day. So what have we got to? So since April 2023, we've had quite a few meetings with both teams from Regenstrief and SNOMED to a point where we were able to find the way that we're going to do this. We produced a proof of concept, if you remember, back in April, of about 100 LOINC terms to see where we got to, and that worked. And so we went away and we basically produced this preview that was released on Monday, as Shelley said, 22,840 LOINC terms. When we started this, we were saying, well, maybe we'll get to a couple of thousand by the end of 2023. So we're extremely happy with the process that we've made. When we looked at this, we kind of focused on what can we get in the top 20,000 LOINC terms. The percentage we offer is roughly in probably 45, 46%, so there's a lot more to do. And it's interesting to see where that kind of goes along. And we'll hear today how we've done this using patterns. So by definition, picking patterns, you're not going to get the exact things you want, and you get more of a broad reach. But some of the interesting discussions since the LOINC conference, I've been speaking with Feike from the Netherlands, I was with David from Belgium, and I think Matt from Australia. Well, we're getting the lab code sets being used and the popularity in those countries. So it starts to give us a really good idea about where do we focus, what do we go for. So really kind of that international collaboration as well is playing into this. The extensions is the RF2 format. It's a classic SNOMED extension for those of you who are used to using extensions, based on the October International Edition and the 2.76 version of LOINC that was produced in September. So it's up to date, very up to date. There's a great website that was put together by the Regenstrief team. Looks really good. Hosting a picture of the browser as well. Nice little QR code if you want to go there direct. But we put in just a screenshot of the browser. So the browser some of us know and love far too well. But the exciting thing here is seeing the LOINC code there. We didn't have that before, we didn't have a way to do it, and now we can see the SNOMED code along with the LOINC code directly. This is what a user can see, this is how a user can use it. This is the power of this collaboration and the piece of work they're producing. They're one and the same, it's just a different way of seeing the same content. So please go and visit the browser to dig around and see what's in there. I'll hand over to Dr. Case, Jim.
So one of the things that we tried to do in the collaboration is to kind of set a philosophical premise on how we're going to handle this. And as Shelley mentioned before, this is a product that's going to be wholly owned by Regenstrief and maintained and managed by them over the long haul. And in an effort to try and provide a comprehensive solution, we're looking at eventually including all the LOINC content in the extension over time. We've started with this first 23, as Rory mentioned. We're focusing on patterns, trying to essentially apply a systematic approach to adding the content. We are going to be mapping all of the existing SNOMED codes that are in the observable hierarchy to LOINC codes, and then making new LOINC codes as needed if they're not included in the LOINC content right now. It's kind of a give and take on both sides. So as we provide content that we have that LOINC doesn't have, they'll assign it into their content, and then essentially provide one unified view of observables in both SNOMED international release and the LOINC extension. So it'll be a continuum. We are working on this, and I think you're going to hear a lot more about this in the technical session, that the way that we're approaching this is not going in and remodeling everything in SNOMED one by one within the terminology. We're using a lot of automated methods. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So the focus is on looking at the component parts of a LOINC term and echoing. So looking at the individual parts of a LOINC term, mapping them to SNOMED codes, and then using that source information to automatically create the LOINC codes themselves. And so that enables us, once we identify particular patterns, to do a lot more work, which is why we have 23,800 concepts in the initial release instead of just a couple of thousand. We are going to be incrementally identifying new domains and new patterns, as Rory mentioned also, we're looking at what are the highest usage observable type content in our member countries so that we can focus on the most important ones to them, and hopefully to address the immediate needs and then address the long tail of content that may not be as easy to put in. So we still have a lot of work to do in that area. One of the things that we're not doing is we're not automatically creating grouper codes. And by grouper codes, I mean taxonomic groupers, something that is going to provide more of a taxonomic structure within there, because a lot of those codes are simply used for grouping and they're not used actually in clinical records. And because that many or most of the codes that are going into the extension are sufficiently defined, we can leverage ECL to create any of the subsets that we need. And that's an important aspect that currently was missing with LOINC that they're gaining in the ontology. And so we're able to provide them with a much more robust way of doing analytics on observables. And To support the exchange of data between systems that use LOINC and systems that use SNOMED, we have an equivalence table between them. One of the things is we're not really creating a map, we're creating an equivalence between the two codes. And so it's easy to find out what a SNOMED representation is by applying the LOINC code, and vice versa. The SNOMED code is then automatically associated with a LOINC code. The FSNs in the LOINC extension are going to be created again through an automated process by looking at the individual parts of a LOINC code and then using some rules that we have developed that the FSNs and the preferred terms will be automatically created according to a systematic structure that is documented in our technical specification guide.
Challenges. There's always challenges.
A couple of them. So there are parts of LOINC that do not fit exactly within the LOINC model. So one of the parts of LOINC is the document name. So there's what's called the document ontology that is part of the LOINC release. They're not observables. They have a different semantic structure than what an observable would have, and so one of the things that we're going to be working on in the next phase or in a future phase of the project is to develop a model that represents document types and then be able to integrate that into the international release as an extension as well. So the international release will act as kind of a stub for the document architecture that's developed by LOINC, and it will be very similar in philosophy to the observable model, but it will be separate because it will be in another hierarchy within the terminology. Some of the challenges that we have are the creation of calculated observables. One of the issues that we run up against is that a calculated result in an observation, such as a ratio between one substance and another substance, really is not a subtype of each of those two substances, but another calculation. It's a new thing. And so we, in our tech preview from 2017, we didn't address it that way, so we're having to create a new set of properties that allow us to say that these are specific calculations, and they'll have a new sub-hierarchy within the observable hierarchy. We're going to be using ref sets, and both extensional and intentional ref sets, in order to create the value sets that are related to individual LOINC terms. We've had a number of discussions on how do we link the answer lists, as they're called in LOINC, the answer list to a particular observable. Those are defined within the LOINC standard, and so we're going to be using ref sets and a new mechanism to link those to observables to provide the allowable set of values that go with each of the observables. We are still talking about a way to handle collections and batteries and panels. LOINC has a mechanism that they use to define that. We do not have a similar mechanism in SNOMED, and so we are discussing a number of alternatives for how those things can be represented. Currently, we have a limited number of panels within SNOMED, but none of them are defined. They're just simply a description of the name of the panel, and then we leave it up to the implementers to decide what observables go along with that. We've had some initial discussion on survey instruments as well, which is a different beast than a normal laboratory or clinical observable. And those, because survey instruments are integrated documents, that the individual observations that go with a survey instrument are context dependent on the survey to which they're attached. So there's a lot more semantics in the development of survey instruments. So that's another project that's farther down the road, but a challenge that we need to address. And then lastly, language translations, which is always something of interest to our members, and we'll be discussing mechanisms to handle that as well. So we are going to be discussing a lot of things, but these are the future challenges that we have to address as we move the project forward.
Stan, do you have anything to add to the fun?
The only thing I'd say is that, you know, the collections, panels, and batteries is sort of a deep area, and they within LOINC and actually kind of within the world, you know, there are different kinds of collections. as you said, there are collections where being part of that collection adds context and meaning to the things that are in that group of things, like assessment things. There are other things that are groups, just kind of arbitrary groups, like all of the things that you want to ask about during a 3-month well baby check, or that sort of thing. There are also things that are related metabolically, so metabolic panels or electrolyte panels. Anyway, there's a lot to do there too, just to sort of, and probably the first thing is just to use consistent terminology, consistent words when we're describing those different things, because I think that it's important to make sure that we're covering the solution in a good way for the things that we're doing. But I would just add, I mean, I'm in heaven. This is a wonderful collaboration, and these kind of fractal, semi-philosophical questions doesn't get any better. Maybe the Queen concert was better, but maybe that's the only thing. I don't know. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. You should hear some of the discussions we get into in our meetings go down. I've learned things about medicine I never wanted to know. I think one other thing I would add to the approach we've taken is that being fully aware that whilst there are a lot of people who are excited about using the LOINC ontology and LOINC extension, there are others who are taking a different approach as well. And so our approach has always been to make sure we isolate this within the extension. We're not making changes in the international edition to fit into the LOINC model, so that we're not, this is part of what Shelley was saying about a family of standards that work off the same structure. So this is the approach we're taking and doing our best to do that. So
Yeah, I just kind of to echo that and say for LOINC users, it doesn't change anything that they're currently doing if they're using LOINC except making it better. So that's something that there's an advantage that they're gaining without any detriment to the fact that they use LOINC within their systems at this point.
Yeah, I think we in the work was it the RAST area where we went down an area and realized that we were identifying some things that need to be changed. They got changed in the last version of LOINC, and so the collaboration is working on both directions, which is why it's a great learning for everybody. So
There's 3 chairs up front here, guys. One there and a couple at this table.
Always in the front.
We promise not to call on you.
Yeah, it's just audience participation.
Yeah.
Go.
We're not just because we're not going to make you do anything.
So, but I mean, with all these challenges, this is just the start of the journey. There's a lot more for us to do, and we're going to need your input. And as Shelley said, we wanted to really kind of go dark, just get something done, and give you something of substance that you can then feed us back to. There's nothing worse than starting with there's nothing worse in a semantic standard world of starting with a blank piece of paper, because we'll be talking for another 3 years about what the title of the piece of paper is. So we wanted to go get something out there that we now have these fruitful discussions that we're going to have today and others.
And I think we'll really been, I'm sure Roy's had conversations with Marjorie Stan, you've all had conversations with people that are interested in specific areas. I'm looking at the back here table. Rob McClure mentioned to me he's very interested in the document stuff that's in LOINC and stuff. So, when we start to tackle those problems, we need you to provide input and help us determine what's going to work.
Yeah. So the next part is, we started this last year on a great idea from Marjorie, and this is the guided audience participation, or rather panel interrogation. This is why we look so grim on the photo earlier on. What's the next question? So I'll hand over to Marjorie to go through our questions.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. And again, I want to reiterate that this is a collaboration. We're not doing this in isolation at all. So it's a collaboration not only between our 2 organizations, but all of you as well. And along the way, we've been asking ourselves questions. People have been writing to us, and so we thought we would share that. And these FAQs are intended to spur more discussion and help get this right and right for you. So I'll just go over the first question, and then the panelists, who's ever appropriate, will answer. So when is the first production release of the LOINC extension expected? We've already given you a preview, but I'm sure everyone is waiting for the first production release. So who'd like to take that one?
Who'd like to put their neck on the line about the date?
No clue. No, I think we want to make progress as fast as we can, and I don't think we want to be limited in what we can do by an arbitrary deadline. We hope what we're making, people can review, and that will lead to enhancements, and so I won't even guess. We're just going to keep working hard and producing stuff, and as soon as we have things that are ready for review, we'll do other previews or other ways of exposing the content to people. And so, yeah, I'm not going to commit publicly to any date for a formal release.
I'm going to commit publicly.
Oh, no.
I don't know if there's a committal, but, I mean, I think we originally said that we hoped something would go in 2024. So
That's a look of going out in 2024.
So let's put a goal out there, if everyone, I should have probably talked to Marjorie about this before, but, I mean, I think that's a realistic goal, that we get something out in 2024.
I think we'll get
What do you think,
something
Stan?
out, yeah.
That's a good goal.
It's a good goal, okay.
I think it's, I mean, the reality is that's possible. I mean, if you think about when we would like you to do this, it's one of the questions we ask ourselves about what that release cycle would be. And it's always going to be after the latest release of LOINC. So straight away, you've got 2 milestones that might come kind of clear. But I think as a group and as a community, we need to agree with a new product like this, which is a fairly new and unique product, what is the criteria percentage for us to say we're happy with what's in there that's good enough to be used? And at the moment, I think we're thinking that that's around a coverage of the top terms. And that will drive, do we need to hit 60% or 7%? And also, obviously, based on all the feedback that we're going to get, that will drive, we are hoping there are no red flags or no big issues. And if there are, we'll fix them. But we'll take that into account and see what that does to the dates. But I think, yeah, our aim is to do something in 2024, absolutely. We don't want to, and we said this last year, that we've done this big push. We don't want to stop pushing because it's very easy for it to stop and die on the vine. We want to keep this going. We want to keep this moving forward as much as we possibly can. So there is an intention to do. We're just not going to promise, but there'll be something in 2024. So.
Yes. So next question. Where do I go to download the production release? Should I answer that?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go on, it's yours.
So you can get that from the LOINC website. You can also go to loincsnomed.org to get that, to download the production release when it's ready. I think we'll also, that might evolve and change over time as we look at what our user needs are. We heard from Rob McClure about that, and so stay tuned. So right now, the production release will, you can find it at the LOINC website. Anything else to add? Okay.
I think even though it's not a production release, the current alpha
Yes.
release is also available from those sites. So if you wanted to bring it into your system and start testing, just recognizing that it is not a production release, it's for review and hopefully comment from the community so that we can continue to improve the product.
Yes. How do I sign up to get news about the extension or express interest in collaborating on the extension? Stan, you want to answer that? I can answer it. but-
Yeah, you can probably do it. It's good.
So you go to the same place, loincsnomed.org. You can also send an email to loinc.org. We also have a browser, as you know, but there are a number of places that you can go to do that. Can I browse the extension, and if so, how? So I just answered that question.
Yeah.
What is it? We should have put the browser URL here.
So the browser, so if you go to this is the landing page of the website.
Yeah.
And so there's a big blue button in the middle. We had this question, how do I get to the browser? Click on the big blue button, and that will take you to the browser.
That's right.
So yes. And just to tell you, the browser, this is a browser that's hosted within the Regent Street environment. So it's not on the SNOMED International browser, although it's using, obviously the same source code. But we've been working very closely with Stephen and the team back at Regent Street to get this up and running, and they've done a great job to get it where it is too. So thank you, Stephen, if you're listening.
Yes, they're not here today, but
Yeah.
we will relay that to them. What is the source for the extension content?
So as we mentioned, this is a product that is owned and maintained by Reagan Street, and because of that, we are using the LOINC release files as the source of truth. That's the source of all the information that's being used to create the extension itself. You'll hear more about the technical aspects of it at all, but it's in the second session here. But essentially, what we do is we load that file into our tooling in order to create the LOINC extension itself. So when we identify issues with the LOINC extension itself, or with the extension, we go back to Reagan Street and we say, here are issues, and we work together to resolve those issues. That's reflected in the release files, and then those edited release files are used to regenerate the LOINC extension.
Right. Okay, next question. Maybe Stan, you'll take this one. Does the extension impact existing release cycles for LOINC or SNOMED?
No. If anything, it would be the other way. We would obviously, in releasing the LOINC ontology as a SNOMED extension, that's going to be timed with getting the most current content from LOINC or SNOMED combined in that new release of the ontology. So but it doesn't change the LOINC release schedule or the SNOMED release schedule. Those things are on their own path, independent of exactly when we release updates to the ontology. So.
Great, thank you. Is the LOINC extension content included in the international release of SNOMED CT?
No. No, it is
Short
an
answer.
extension, even though there's an integration with the international release. Because of the ontological structure, all of the LOINC codes are then tied eventually to a code within the international release. It is not going to be part of the international release itself.
Just to add to that, I mean, one of the things we talked about, even in the preview, is there were choices in how we did that. You could release it basically where the release had all of the concepts that are used to define the LOINC codes, and those things only. Or you could have, release the release on top of something else, either a national release or international release, etc. And what we're trying to accomplish in a large part is the ability to reason better about LOINC codes. And so it's one thing to know that, an antigen or antibody test about hepatitis C, has hepatitis C, but then you want to be able to say, well, how does hepatitis C relate to the other kinds of hepatitis, and how, and so you get that from the richness of the rest of SNOMED. So, this preview release I think is on top of the international release, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we want to release it that way because that's how you get the richness and the integration of the two objects. So.
All right, thank you.
Oh, just to add to that is, so whilst extension content is not included in the international edition, if we got to a scenario where there was content that other countries felt was useful, and as a joint team we were happy with that content could be promoted to the international edition. That's been part of the agreement that we discussed. Mm-hmm. Once we're in that position and we have production releases, that is something that may well be of interest to other countries who are not necessarily using the totality of LOINC. So.
Yes, okay. So we have this next set of questions. We'll take one at a time. So what are the next LOINC concepts to be modeled?
So our emphasis right now is to address the immediate needs in the laboratory space. We're going to be focusing on trying to complete as much of LabLoinc as we can, and even within that, prioritizing those that have been showing up in the top 20,000, as well as the most frequently used observable content that we see from some of our member countries. So that's going to be the initial focus. Once we finish lab, then we'll be looking at, it's going to be a little more challenging to look at the clinical observables. They have a slightly different set of semantics that we have to work on. But I think that there are some things that might be able to go in parallel. So for instance, we mentioned the document ontology. That's really a separate product that we can work on independently. And yeah, Rob's raising his hand back there. So that's something that we can work on independently from the laboratory side, because it really is a completely separate model. And so there may be some parallel work going on, but right now the focus is on finishing the laboratory area.
Yes. So that answers the next question. Will all LabLoinc be included? And
That's the goal.
that's the goal, right. And I think you already answered that we will also work on clinical LoINC
That's the
and
goal.
other areas of LoINC as determined.
Yes.
Yep. All right. When requesting a new LoINC concept, will a new equivalent concept in SNOMED be created as well, and vice versa?
No. So as we mentioned before, this is not a map, this is an equivalence representation. So when a new LOINC cont is created, it will show up in the release files of LOINC and will automatically get added to the extension itself. We'll talk a little bit about content requests later on. So there's some processes that we need to develop in terms of requests that come into SNOMED for observables, that we're still working out the exact processes, but there's not going to be duplicate creation of concepts in both LOINC and SNOMED. It's all one integrated product.
I think if new content gets added to the LOINC release that falls into one of the patterns, then it'll be automatically picked up in the translation over to the LOINC the extension. So, yeah.
Okay. Will there be a map between the SNOMED CT extension content and the LOINC content?
No. No, again, we really want to emphasize that what we have is a single product that has alternative representations of the two standards. One that maintains the LOINC representation in the LOINC release files, and another representation, equivalent representation in SNOMED. So there's no need for a map because we've already got equivalence between the two. And you know, maps, you look at maps and you say, well, is it a true equivalent? Is it narrower than or broader than? Because we're using the LOINC release files as a source of truth, there's no ambiguity at all. They're totally one-to-one equivalents in the two representations.
And yeah, and just to add, so in the RF2 file, in the RF2 spec, there's a file called the alternative identifier file that may well have been created way back for something very similar to this, but never got used. So we were able to revive that, and so now we use the alternative identifier file, which essentially says, here's the source code identifier and here's the target code identifier. It looks like a map ultimately, but it's a one-to-one equivalence map. So that information is available in a bit of a separate file in the RF2 package, but it is there. So.
Right. How do I get a translation of the LOINC extension of the content? Stan, you want that one?
I don't know what the question means.
This
They're
is
talking.
Roy, did you read that?
So yeah, that was a sneaky question, wasn't it, really? I was trying to catch us out, but of course, if I put the question, I'm just...
Yeah, so you can answer the question
Yeah,
you
okay. Well,
wrote.
I think I put this there because there are translations of LOINC, and I wanted to kind of acknowledge that.
So language translation.
You
Yeah,
mean language
translations,
translation?
yes.
Okay.
Sorry, yes. Semantics, oh yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, we have language translations of LOINC, and you would get these translations in the same way that you would get those.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the areas that we do need to think about how we do that from the SNOMED structure. Now, we can lean on the stuff that's been done in the LOINC translations. Can we use those as part of the patterns? I don't know. We've not got there yet to look at that part.
Yeah, there are member countries that have translated LOINC parts or equivalent parts in there, and I think that we can leverage some of the work that's been done in some of our member countries to allow us to develop a process for doing the type of translations that we need to do. So again, try to automate this process as much as possible.
But I think, again, the difference between the SNOMED world of translations and the LOINC world of translations is that translations, Spanish aside, are generally done by the countries. So in SNOMED, this would be, if you have a national extension, you would extend the LOINC module and translate in your national extension. So the ownership is there. We'll do what we can to help people who want to translate as always, but it wouldn't be in the LOINC extension package. It would be in the relevant country extensions because they need to depend on the LOINC extension to be able to do that. So that's kind of where that would end up when we get there.
Okay. All right, I think that's it. Or
That's the end of the FAQ. So over to you. So this is kind of the first part for you to ask some questions. We're going to have two question parts, mainly because we've got a great overview and we're here to answer these types of questions. And after the coffee break, we go into the deep dive weeds bit, and there'll be different types of questions. So the floor is open, please. Rob, that was quick. I didn't even say put your hand up. Okay. There's a microphone on the table, so. Well, no, for the webinar. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Hello?
Yep.
So we talked about creating FSNs through an algorithmic process that's following the SNOMED rules, right, Jim? So that actually piqued my interest with regards to which is the name that's going to be used for these concepts, because they are one concept, two identifiers. We're all in agreement with that, right? Are we? All in agreement, yeah. So does that mean we have more than one string representation of these concepts depending on the identifier, code system identifier that's used?
Yeah.
Yes. So we're going to be
I'm not
including all of
happy
the
with that.
we're going to be including all of the LOINC descriptions as synonyms within the LOINC extension. So you won't be losing any information that's already represented in the LOINC files.
Say what you said again. Say what you said again.
So we use an automated process to create the FSNs and the preferred term as they're represented in the LOINC extension, but we also include all of the LOINC term representations that are currently published in the LOINC release files as synonyms to that concept.
Yeah, that's what I thought you said. So, so when because what you said is in the LOINC extension, the FSN is going to be created through this algorithmic process. So that means that the fully specified name will not be the LOINC fully specified name anymore.
Correct.
That's right.
That's interesting. I'll
But
withhold my judgment on that.
I guess I would ask what challenge you see with that, because to me, they're just synonyms.
No.
You need the FSN, you know, you need the FSN to be consistent with the overall strategy of SNOMED. It has to be unique globally within SNOMED so that we could promote it to the international edition. In a given, you know, just like language translations or something else, you can have other names, and so we could have a rule in the U.S. that if you want to refer to this in literature or something else, you know, you use the preferred U.S. synonym for that item, and that can be the LOINC.
Yeah, no.
full name.
You're going. I mean, true, right? So I'm thinking more about two things. One, you know, the traditional thing, which is we tell people that identifiers are the way that you actually identify concepts, and that the string representation is the string representation, but we all know they ignore us, right? And then they are dependent on the string representation they use. So that's just, let's acknowledge that that occurs, even if we want them to not do it that way. And then, so in LOINC, you know, it's the fully specified name, which is this long thing. And certainly in lab, I'm sure that it's unique in the domain of SNOMED. So I guess I'm a little surprised. There must be a real reason why, other than other than maybe consistency, where you didn't pick the thing that is the current LOINC identifier, string identifier, the fully specified name, as the preferred term inside the LOINC extension. That, I think, is an interesting choice that has some implications for the LOINC community that I'm not sure you're going to have to come up with some justifications for that. Let's just put it that way. I'm not weighing in. I'm just saying funny that the thing that we would push towards our future, i.e., I think hopefully you would agree with me in that one might imagine a future where this would be the only LOINC release, right? That would be a goal, that there would be the LOINC release would be through this process where it's it's got two different identifiers and it follows a concept model that is let's celebrate unified concept model, right? All of that sort of stuff. So someday in the future, that's what we do. And then in doing that, there's no question that what we end up creating in LOINC as these fully specified names is awkward, right? And I get that. But as we start to look at some of the other domains, it's one thing it's awkward in lab, but it's truthful, right? It's an accurate representation of the meaning in LOINC. That's why it's picked as the meaning. So the meaning in LOINC, right, is the name and the code together. That is the meaning. And now the meaning in the extension becomes confusing because what is the meaning? It's the synonym and the code. So anyway, now that you're sitting here, come on, Stan, you get my point, is that we've taken something that we've told the LOINC community, the meaning of the LOINC concept is the fully specified name and the code. And now...
It's not just that. You're simplifying it.
No.
It's not true at all. It's defined by the attributes and the concepts that are used to create the name, to create the meaning. And yeah. You don't see the fully specified LOINC name anywhere except in the LOINC browser. You don't see it in instance data. You don't see it in the literature. You don't see it anywhere.
No, I get that.
So I think this is sort of a non-issue. But that's my opinion, and you're welcome to yours.
Well, it certainly makes your position easier to make it a non-issue. But I think I agree with you that in terms of practical implications, I'm not sure. That's why I'm just raising it as an interesting choice, and that we need to be confident.
I can give other things that we talked about in reasoning about this. As you know, in SNOMED, often to get a unique meaning for something, they actually need to add a suffix that says this is a finding versus this is a diagnosis versus this is something else. And so to make it globally unique, you need to add that.
Yeah.
Okay. And the fact, the fully specified name has a particular role. We're not saying that's the preferred way to refer to these things in the SNOMED extension. We're saying that's the name that it needs to have to be consistent and integratable with the SNOMED ontology. Okay? We need to follow that convention because as we talked about, if this is a pattern and we started doing genetic data or something else,
I hear that, and I totally get it. That's why, again, I'm not trying to put too much weight on it. I'm just pointing out that there was something that I hadn't really kind of understood until you said that that's actually the preferred name, and now that's different from LOINC. And so we have this disjointness that from what the LOINC community has seen to what we are perceiving as the future. And it's going to have an even bigger impact, I think, when we start to do things that aren't as kind of, very unique, because lab is so unique. But when we start to get into document ontology and clinical, there's going to be a lot of overlap. And so what that was thought of as the name in LOINC is now going to be something different in SNOMED. And or not just SNOMED, in this joint project.
I think it's important to recognize that other than the FSN, which we never recommend to be using in clinical records, any of the descriptions, even though we designate one as the preferred term, any of those designations can be used to represent that code. So there's nothing that would prevent somebody that was implementing the LOINC extension to choose the LOINC representation, which is included as a synonym, as the display term or as the transmission term that is used in exchange between organizations. So the fact that we have unique identifiers associated with each description then provides that uniqueness that allows the variability in the description representation, but it's all tied back to the same concept. And that's the whole issue with synonymy, is that people like to use different terms to represent it, but as long as it's tied back to the concept ID, and that concept ID is tied to a LOINC ID, you have complete traceability. It's just a question of what do I want to see on the screen or what do I want to see in a report.
Keith.
Well, good morning. I want to add to this description discussion, but first I just want to say thank you. I mean, this is a tremendous amount of work. Many of us have been hoping for something like this to come together for quite some time, and you're getting it across the finish line, and I just want to really acknowledge, I know that it wasn't trivial organizationally or technically. So let me just say thank you again for that. I'm a little confused because I think LOINC has a, they don't have a fully they have a long common name. Is that correct? Right. And so within SNOMED, you have the ability to add a new description type, right? And so you can add to that extension, you can add a LOINC long common name description type, and it can live as it needs to live alongside a fully qualified name that is consistent with SNOMED. In addition, you also have another mechanism that you can rely on to try to resolve that, which is to have use the ideas of dialects. That within dialects, you can say that if you're using it within a LOINC context, you might prefer the long common name to be displayed instead of the fully specified name to be displayed within LOINC. I mean, within the interface. So you have those choices, and you have tools that already exist and already are within the standard to accommodate this need. And I believe that it can be done in a way that meets the concerns that Rob is bringing up, but also meets the need for consistency, backward compatibility with LOINC, as well as backward and forward compatibility with the SNOMED and the SNOMED integration. So I think very resolvable, and I think, again, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to, that's a much more elegant answer than I gave, so I appreciate that. But the fact is that we do have mechanisms within SNOMED right now to address the need for a particular representation in a particular use case. And we actually don't even need to change anything right now, because we do have the ability to represent language, ref sets, or dialects in the terminology, and that can be selected for whatever level we would like. So thanks, Keith.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think this is part of the discussions we need with all of you. We've got the idea, but we don't entirely know how you're going to use it. And as Jim and Keith said, there's a lot, SNOMED's incredibly extendable, and we can do all this stuff, but we need your feedback on how you want us to do it. And that's really where we're open to discussions now. So yeah, we did discuss a little bit about where do we go with the descriptions. Do you use language reference sets and so on? Tell us. Susan?
So I'm Susan Matney, and I think the LOINC community doesn't understand this as well as you do, is they need the international version as well as the LOINC extension. So when they go to the website to download the LOINC ontology, I'm not calling it the right words, the LOINC ontology, then they need to understand that they're going to need the international version in order for it all to run, because there's a lot of parts and pieces in the international version that we pull off of for the ontology in LOINC.
Yeah. And that's a very fair point. And we had this, actually it was one of the questions we had last week around, what does that mean for licensing? And to clarify the licensing question, The LOINC extension is fully under the current LOINC license. Yeah, the Region Chief LOINC license. It's fully owned and maintained by that. Obviously, you absolutely need the international edition. It's a module dependency. You can't really use it without it, and that is still traditional, SNOMED license as they stand. So, but yes, you would need both, 100%. Jim.
And following up on Rob and Keith's comments, I want to point out, for those of you who are pursuing this collaboration on behalf of us, that there's still going to be a real need for visualization, computational interoperation between these terminologies. In the US, LOINC, SNOMED, RX norm are what we use, okay, in our electronic health records. And so being able to visualize, understand the useful relationships between them, and to be able to employ your tooling, Rory, to use those computationally for purposes of analytics and so forth, is the holy grail that we're pursuing. And so I think the issue of browsability still remains for the vast majority of those that are struggling to employ terminology in their electronic health records.
So yes, but we just started on LOINC. Let's leave RX norm for now. So one thing at a time. But that'd be a great place to go. I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree. And across other standards, let's be clear, there are many other out there. And this is why we kind of started this discussion about, I kind of think of it like franchising the SNOMED model to a certain extent. We're just letting people use the object model and the structures that we have because it gives a single way for everybody to see this. Everybody's standard is special and different, but they should kind of be usable together. So if this is a way to do that, I think this is really powerful, and this is where we're trying to get to. So I think as Shelley said right at the beginning, this is the first of likely to be more, basically. So yes, agreed. And at that point, we can put it all into one browser and everybody's happy. But the browser is only one thing, and I want to emphasize, I think everybody here in the room, the browser is great, but actually it's what do the implementers want as well. And whilst they use the browser, they're more likely using this in clinical systems. What does that look like? How does it get used? These are areas of feedback that I think we would be very, very grateful for, because I don't think we know, again, so that'd be good.
A related issue that comes to mind, and we went over it kind of quickly in the information that we presented, was the decision not to put grouper codes in. So if you go in and look at the preview release, you'll see that it looks really pretty flat. It is pretty flat. It doesn't just look that way. It is. What we thought about is we could go to a lot of work and sort of put in those grouper codes, but in a sense, the codes that you put in are pretty arbitrary based on your use case. The way that you want to see the concepts organized is just represents basically one point of view. And what we recognized is the power of the expression constraint language, and that you can, because of the computability and the computable relationships between the elements, and I'll even say, a little more, because, the way this is being done is that you're making correspondence between elements in the LOINC code and elements in the machine-readable concept model. And that now represents then a computable way to look at these things. And so with ECL, what it means is I can have it my way. I can make, an ECL expression that will now show the relationships that I'm interested in. I'm sort of slow and still learning. Jim Campbell's trying to educate me, to give me a tutorial on this. But the idea, we can make libraries and share libraries of common expressions that allow you now to see subtypes of these things exactly as you want to see them. And so we think it's more powerful. I think it's going to take some education and tooling and other things to realize the whole power of that concept.
I think whilst I'm speaking, I'll just put up the browser just so you can see, as he said, you know, the observable entity has 7,500 children, which is quite high in most of our taxonomies. But, you know, if you go and look at some of the concepts, you can see, we were talking about the synonyms, you can see all the synonyms are there, but you can see the relationships and the attributes. And, you know, you run ECL across the attributes. So I'm looking for everything with a single point in time aspect. I don't have to have a taxonomy about it. I can use ECL to get it. So that the model is the richness and the power that SNOMED brings into this. So the browser takes a long time to load up because there's so many children on the first thing. But yeah, we're coming at this a bit different than we've done in other ways. We've got the opportunity to start in the right place than inherit the wrong things, and that's where we want to get to. There's a question in there.
Hi, again, I echo this is a great project. Question about, a couple questions. One is, are all of the LOINC concepts in SNOMED fully defined?
No, not all of them. The vast majority are. I don't know what the percentage is, but maybe that'll be addressed in the second session. But not every one of them is definable at this point.
Okay, thank you. And kind of related to that, the parts, the LOINC parts, the part values. For example, obviously the value of the components and the value of the specimen or system method, maybe. Are those structured in SNOMED to the extent they're mapped to SNOMED concepts or introduced into the hierarchy? So, for example, is serum or plasma, does that subsume serum in SNOMED, the corresponding SNOMED concepts?
Yeah, all the LOINC parts are mapped to a SNOMED compliant hierarchical structure in there, and that's actually what's used as the source for the creation of the FSN as well as the models. So we're really focusing on making sure that we get the part maps correct. By the part maps, we're actually representing all of the LOINC parts as SNOMED concepts, and then those concepts in SNOMED follow our structural rules so that they subsume correctly, and that's how we end up with the hierarchy that we end up with, because they conform to those rules. So we're hoping for a complete one-to-one representation of LOINC parts where we can to SNOMED parts. And as Rory mentioned before, what we're finding is that in one or the other of the standards we may have some errors or ambiguity that need to be fixed, and so we're actually improving both of the standards as we try and resolve issues between these different representations of the LOINC parts. So again, that's something that we can talk about in more detail in the second session.
Well, and then lastly, again, you may get to this, but given those two answers, has the LOINC extension been itself classified using the classifier?
Yeah, it's classified. What we're
conferred additional structure, or given the definition of LOINC and the relationships among its part values, that actually doesn't lead to much inference of subsumption relationships?
So the short answer is yes, it does classify, because we use the values from the LOINC parts to create the model that's applied to each term, and as each term is sufficiently defined, then it can be applied to the classifier. As Rory showed you, it's quite flat, but it's not as flat as I thought it was going to be when we classified it. So we've got 23,000 concepts in there, but there's only 7,000 immediate subtypes of observable entity, which means there is some hierarchical structure in there. And so we are leveraging that to create the taxonomic structure. We could, as Stan mentioned, we could create higher level grouper concepts that would provide more of a type of a tree structure, but we don't see any need to do that, since most of the concepts are defined and you can apply ECL to that to get the subtypes that you want. We can't address all of the different ways that people might want to see observables structured by creating grouper concepts that have no clinical usefulness. They would just be organizational groupers. And so we've opted to leave those out and apply the ECL tooling in order to meet the same need, that people can select what they want, but in a much more structured way than they could by simply trying to create a bunch of arbitrary groupers.
You wouldn't use in that LOINC part. So like serum, right? There is a concept, there's got to be, in SNOMED that means serum. So you didn't map to that. You used that concept, right?
We use that concept. So
Right. So it's not mapping. I mean,
again, we'll talk about that in the technical side of that, on how that process actually works. And so rather than me getting down into the weeds and saying something that I might regret later on, I'm gonna leave it to the folks that are actually doing the technical work to explain how that works.
core. And so if I looked at serum, I would see what was in SNOMED core, SNOMED International, as well as the things that classify based on this extension being added. Is that correct?
Philosophically, that's correct. And the reason I say philosophically is that we have not sufficiently modeled a lot of the observable content in the international release. Once that's done, then absolutely that's true. And that's going to be part of this project, that not only are we going to provide the extension, but we'll improve the overall modeling of the observables in the international release to improve that structure.
So you would agree with me in saying that the idea of taking the LOINC parts where there are direct equivalents to existing SNOMEDs concepts, there was no mapping, you just used that concept.
We used that concept, but we had to identify which LOINC part we were going to create as an equivalence. So we have an equivalence map between the LOINC part identifier and the LOINC part and the representative LOINC concept itself. So because we're originating from two standards.
It's not a map we produce, but I mean, the team will go into some pretty pictures and details about that. So, do we have any questions online? I'm looking at the one question. Thanks, Jim.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, there's one online from Michael Osborne. How does the SNOMED agreement impact on countries using procedure codes for plastic pathology and radiology?
It does not.
You can hear it. Any other questions on the floor? Yep, please go ahead.
It doesn't work.
Yes,
It works. Thank you. My name is Alexander Davidov. I represent the Odyssey community here, and I want to ask one small clarifying question. So, Jim, as you said, these LOINC parts are actually not mapped, but the SNOMED's attributes are used instead of the LOINC parts, right? And as I see in the browser, when we click on the specific attributes, it jumps to another page where these are just the SNOMED attributes, right? But does the model preserve the original LOINC representation so that I can see what are the LOINC codes of the parts or not?
The LOINC code is right there, sort of highlighted in that.
Are you putting the LOINC part ID on the LOINC
No.
part? Yeah, that's...
I think that's a very good question, and something we
Have
talked about and probably will do. We just haven't got there yet.
So that is just how it's represented here on the browser, right? But the actual model do preserve this.
Since we do have a one-to-one correlation between the individual LOINC parts as they're represented in the LOINC release files and the parts that are in SNOMED, it is something that we can represent because we have that identifier. It's just that we haven't implemented that in the browser, so you can't actually see what the LOINC part identifier is. But that's something that we had talked about whether that's something we wanted to do right away or something that we would do later.
I think it's more that it's not actually in the preview yet. So,
Right.
so we concentrate on having the alternative identifier for those concepts we created, not the existing things. And so it's on the roadmap. So in my mind, one of the first production release, we need to have those equivalent parts with the identifiers, so you can see them when you're looking in the preview, if necessary. So. Any other questions? Around? Oh, okay.
So a quick question about quality and transparency. So in terms of quality, there's been various initiatives in in the pathology and lab medicine group, including the one that's current, the histopathology. We recognize, despite the effort of multiple subject matter experts over years, decades, there's always room for improvement. And so is there any element of a quality improvement initiative, or is this strictly a one-to-one conversion, get the infrastructure of the process down, and then what happens afterwards? And I guess that leads to the second point. Appreciate the forum to create some transparency, but in the SNOMED world, everything's on Confluence. It's easy to tell what's happening meeting to meeting. Minutes are posted. What's the plan for this extension piece? I understand Regan Street will be undertaking it, but really looking towards the future, what happens now that we have the power of SNOMED behind LOINC and can leverage the ontology to really be able to better select the correct LOINC code in a given particular use case. How are we going to take advantage of that?
That's a Reagan Street question.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a good question. I think what's important to remember in terms of how do we maintain this or whatever is this is a collaborative effort, and we will be working on this together. I think there's, and one of the things that we'll be talking about this afternoon is what does that collaboration look like? So I wouldn't, consider this as a single Regan Street initiative. It's a collaboration effort. What I'll also say is in terms of, I think your question related to transparency, how are we going to communicate all of this work, and we're already doing that with our website, et cetera, and our communities that we plan to build. Does that answer your question, Raj?
At a high level, I guess, there's a lot of laboratory concepts here. Who are the laboratorians that are involved in reviewing it, fixing errors as they see it, when it's mapped to SNOMED, those kinds of things?
One just to pick up on your quality question, which is we're all about quality. That's what we do. I think Jim said that the philosophical approach we've taken with this is to not change LOINC. So we're not here to make LOINC better in SNOMED. It's representing LOINC as it is in SNOMED. Now in that process, we have identified things on both sides that do need to improve. So we're not modeling anything new in this extension. It's very much taking what's there already. So it's another way of QA on both directions. But yeah, there's what you see in the browser, what you see in the preview should represent exactly what you see in LOINC, but in the SNOMED form. So.
And I think later this afternoon we'll talk about how we bring the subject matter expertise that sit in LOINC and the subject matter expertise that sit in the SNOMED community together to help us with that quality going forward.
Yeah, one of the things that we did not talk about, we mentioned briefly at the LOINC conference, is that this is an ongoing collaboration, and because it's an ongoing collaboration, there needs to be a governance structure involved in that. And so we're in the process of developing what that structure looks like with an integrated steering group that is going to essentially guide the process, and through that then there'll be a communications plan so that we can keep the community informed of what's happening with this ongoing collaboration. I don't see this as a one and done type of project. Even after we get all of LOINC into the SNOMED representation, it's because, as you mentioned, quality is an ongoing process, and we're going to continue to improve that, and the governance structure is going to allow us to do that.
looks like we've got to the end of those questions. So I think we're just a little bit early for the coffee break, but after the coffee break, we'll be joined by Peter Williams, who's in the modelling advisory group. There's a lot of double, triple booking today all over the place. So he's coming in to sit down with Suzanne Farsden and Isa to talk about the detailed stuff, how we've done the mapping. Rob, you're going to get the answers to some of your questions, and then we'll look into that in more detail. So we come back at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Thanks. So it'll be less of some of us talking, and now over to the real team that's done all the really hard work. I'm just here to press next on the PowerPoint. So I'm going to hand over to the team, and I don't know who's starting first. Okay, go. Over to you, Farsden. Please introduce yourselves.
Oh, sure. Hi. So here we are reviewing the technical and content processing overview. And with me here are Isa from Regenstrief, Suzanne Santamaria, and Peter Williams from SNOMED CT. I am from SNOMED CT, obviously, myself. And we're going to be talking about the content side of the mapping and also the technical side of the mapping. We start with the content. Can we go to the next slide? On the content side, we're going to be talking a little bit about, to give you an overview of the process, the source files that we use. Some of them you have heard today, like log part mapping file and those kind of things. Suzanne then is going to talk about the templates and process document, and Isa is going to be talking about some of the challenges that we have had. Some of them are resolved, some of them are still in progress. So can we go to the next slide? On the next slide, if you look at the left side, you can see the template modeling and terming. The templates are based on observable model in SNOMED CT, but obviously we don't have just one observable kind, so that's why we are creating those templates to represent different patterns in observable in general and in LOINC in particular. On the top, bottom part, you see the LOINC part map to SNOMED CT, which is basically the source of content for what we do, while the template are the template, the framework. The content comes from LOINC part map to SNOMED CT, which gets its information from LOINC part detail file from Regenstrief and SNOMED CT monthly releases. So it gets updated based on that. And these two files, the templates and the LOINC part map, incorporate into what we call a process document, which is sort of a guidelines in addition to what we have in the templates, and it also includes some of the exception that we use. We give this process document to Peter, and I just wrote create here, but we know that he does much more than that and uses many more files to then create LOINC concept based on those templates using the mapping between the LOINC part and the SNOMED CT. And he gives us 3 files to look at, one after the other: the Google Sheet output, the classified terms, and the browser. In the Google Sheet output, we see it has different tabs, and we see many different things, but we mostly focus on the termings and to make sure that the primitive concept and fully defined concept are as we are expected. And he also provides us with some stats, so we look at the stats to make sure that they look okay. Also, if there was a failing in mapping, we have those information to look at and see why it failed. Then we classify all those terms, and we look at issues like equivalencies or if there is a misclassification, and try to resolve those. And finally, we get it into the browser, which we then share with Regenstrief for them to look at. And then we review and discuss the issues both internally and with Regenstrief to make sure that the issues are attended to. Some of them result in changes and updates to the LOINC part detail file. Some of them into the SNOMED CT monthly release, and some of them is just updates the LOINC part map to SNOMED CT. For example, if we have a duplicate, we just remove that from the file. So the next slide. We're going to talk about this source file a little bit more. I'm going to be talking about the LOINC part mapping and the templates. Suzanne is going to be providing you with some more detail. In the LOINC part mapping, the starting point for us was the work that we have done for the previous agreement in 2017. We didn't necessarily start it from scratch because it just didn't make sense. We have put a lot of work in that, and for the most part, it looked okay. It just needed to be updated based on the new releases of LOINC and SNOMED CT. And obviously, we also updated it whenever we resolve an issue and if there is something to be resolved. But we identified a few needs as we are going through the file. First of all, we identified that instead of using the LOINC table, which contains all the axes and parts, what we need is the detail file that has all the subparts for all those parts, because in many cases, the one SNOMED CT attribute value is not necessarily mapped to a LOINC part, but rather a subpart. So that was identified, and we have access to the detail file now. We also updated the last part map file that we have. In that there were some information in there that we didn't require it now. If you have access to that and if you have used it for anything, or if you just looked at that, you notice that there are information there about the correlation ID and the source information. Those weren't required because the correlation ID are now is represented in the process document, so those are removed, and what you see in there is just basically a map between the LOINC part, SNOMED CT, the fact that it's an active LOINC part and a SNOMED CT, and it doesn't have information regarding correlation or the source. And we also identified the need to create some of the SNOMED CT concepts that are exclusive to LOINC extension, and they are not internationally applicable. For example, there is a high sensitivity technique that LOINC uses to define some of their laboratory terms that we didn't add to SNOMED as a core, because in SNOMED it's going to be an ambiguous term that is not related to any specific technique. So I think that's my part, and I think Suzanne can take over.
Okay, thank you. So the next source file we wanted to discuss are the templates. So the templates are created based on the SNOMED CT editorial guidelines for observable entity hierarchy. So the templates contain rules for modeling and terming. So for the description portion, the template has a format for SNOMED compliant FSN and PT, which we saw a little bit in the browser earlier. Also, case significance is included in the template. And then as far as the modeling, there is a relationship to observable entity concept in there, and then whatever attributes and allowed values are applicable for that template. Now, the status definition status that's included in the template is sufficiently defined, and we know that we aim to have as many concepts sufficiently defined as possible. So we know we have about 80% defined in the preview. So if there's a reason that a concept can't be sufficiently defined, that would be determined by the process document, which we'll get into in a little bit later. So if we created 2 templates thus far for this part of the project. We have a quality observable template that with component attribute as the focus, and a quality observable template with adheres an attribute as the focus. So these templates support our patterns-based approach to the project, and how, at least for the lab LOINC terms, which we've started with, we're using the property of the lab LOINC term to determine which template is used. So for a lab LOINC term that has a property of, say, mass concentration, it's going to be using the quality observable with component attribute as a focus. And if it's some type of LOINC term that has like identification or type in it, it's going to be using a different template. It's going to be using the template with the quality observable with adheres in as the focus. Okay, next slide. And hopefully if there's time, we'll show you some of the templates on the screen too. So, whoops. Yeah, so now that we've covered the source files, So moving on to the process documentation. So at least on the content side, we created a process document for creating the LOINC concepts. The document includes links to the source files, like the part map that Farzaneh mentioned, the templates, which I just mentioned. And then there's also additional rules in there that apply to, that aren't just specific to a template. So earlier we saw on the screen when we were looking at the single point in time concept in SNOMED. So when we use that concept to define a LOINC concept, we wanted the FSN to be a bit shorter, so we changed that single point in time to just point in time, which you saw on the screen. So that rule is applied in the process document. It's not included in the template. Other rules that might be in the process document, so for example, if there's a LOINC term that has, say, a certain method that method doesn't exist in SNOMED yet as a concept, we went ahead and created a concept for this in the LOINC preview, but we marked that concept as primitive. And so the process document includes those kind of rules that would, for those little details that aren't included in the template. And Peter's going to talk more about the technical side of the process document in creating the concept, so I'm not going to go into that, but just say at least from the content side, then once we get the concepts created by Peter's magic, then we review them, we classify them, we review them again, and if there are any issues that come up, then we'll discuss them amongst the teams, and Isa's going to talk about some of the issues that we've already gone through and some of the ones we're still discussing that seem to go on and on. And as it's an iterative process, of course, we update the files, the templates, process document as needed based on our review and then based on the feedback we know that's coming from you all in the community. So I think that's, I'm going to turn it over to Peter now, who's talk more, even more detail. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Isa, yes, the challenges.
Thank you. Of course, putting or establishing relationship between both databases, it comes with challenges. Some of them we have, thanks to the meeting that we have been doing once every 2 weeks, we were able to address some of them. Others are still in progress, and there are things also yet to come. But at least from perspective of the first time that we have been going through the issues or the challenges that we have been able to address. For example, we have some duplication in the LOINC part, and that's within the LOINC database. So what we did is that we have researched, for example, the example that it is displaying right now, it is a substance that we were able to go back and see how LOINC uses it, what is really the rule in LOINC to go forward, and the source of truth. We would look to CABI, for example. We look into other databases to support the decision going forward. In this case, we were able to continue with the 11K2 androsterone instead of the other one that's duplication for it. Another clarification that was needed from the LOINC part, for example, and Stan, I'm not going to talk about this, the XXX that has been identified in LOINC. So instead of going forward with this, it was much better to just use a general concept, for example, from perspective of specimen, just we say specimen, or from perspective of time, we have established something that is not as specific. And as we are encountering these, we are going with the more general instead of using XXX as it is in the fully specified name in LOINC. Another aspect of this, for example, and this has actually triggered a very good cleanup on our end, as you have seen in in LOINC terminology, the fully specified name, the system, we don't have to include system because in the system property, you can represent, for example, respiratory, and you know that you are talking about a respiratory system. But when we go when I use just respiratory in SNOMED, it doesn't come as a system, it's just respiratory. So it is adjective, it doesn't specify, is it a specimen we are talking about? Is it a system we are talking about? So we went back into LOINC, we cleaned up the system to be much more specific. And we ended up from respiratory, and now we have it as respiratory system specimen. It's a little bit longer, but it is much more detailed and much more specific for the usage of every day. Other things that we have also established from perspective of resolving issues, For example, removing the word specimen from very specified name, because when we are populating that through SNOMED, they already have that included, so it's going to be specimen, specimen. So there is no need to have this duplication from that perspective. Other thing that we have looked at is in LOINC you can establish the species, genus, and so forth. That's a part of the name of the taxonomy, the organism. So this one, we have removed that from it also to remove the aspect of duplication from the representation. The other aspect of the work together is also the challenges, if you don't mind the second one. The other challenges that we have encountered, and it is still in discussion right now, the clarification about the antibiotics, that's also XXX. So this one, we're gonna, I think, Peter, you're gonna be talking about that aspect because it was just surfaced right now, so we're gonna be talking about it going forward. We have not decided on that. The observables that have the anion gap, the ratios, you know, in LOINC you had that divisor that separate between the numerator, denominator, or you have it as a fraction, or you have it as a ratio. This is still in discussion to see how we're gonna come to a term in which it represents that in SNOMED and keep the validity of the way it is represented in LOINC. That has been, that we started from some time and we are still going into that path to see how we're gonna be representing the calculation aspect of it. Also in LOINC you have the possibility of representing data as just observation or only order or both order and observations. This is also, we are trying to do the best in, you know, we could have just picked it and go, but we really want to see what is the ripple effect in case this is going to happen, and we want to see how we can go forward with this annotation. And we have, in LOINC, we have done for a long time the mapping of LOINC part to SNOMED CT. Now that we have the equivalency one-to-one LOINC to SNOMED, then we're going to be seeing how we're going to go ahead and the maintenance, the update, and also the versioning of the data that are in question and that we are using it both together. So now I will move it to Peter.
Thank you, Ezra. Take the next slide, please, Rory, and the next one after that as well. We'll get straight into the detail. So the transformation of a LOINC term to a SNOMED concept has been done in Java, and that process was really informed by the process document that Varsny and Suzanne put together, and we iterated over that more times than probably can be counted. So really I've just done what I was told to do, and it's almost pseudocode in that document. When you see this situation, take the following actions. And a lot of the clarification we had to go through was when those rules came into conflict with each other. So there are times when, if we haven't got a part mapping, we said that we could just mark that concept as primitive and use the actual text from the LOINC term itself to form something. But that depended very much on which part it was. If it was the component that we couldn't map, then the concept has to be thrown out entirely. So during the pilot, we worked on 100 LOINC terms, and we identified 3 templates. And then we got in the room and we said, well, if we took the templates from that initial 100 project and we applied them to all of LOINC, how many would we get? And the answer was 25,000. And we said, that was quite incredible. And because we didn't have to do an awful lot of extra work for that, the code that was written for the pilot, we just applied it to the full set, and we got a result that we were quite stunned with. So yeah, the source code for this is all available in GitHub in the IHTSDO repository under the reporting platform project, which is sort of my Swiss Army knife of code that I write. So it's all tucked in there. It may move around at a later date. So you can see in this diagram that there are a lot of inputs to this process. We take the main LOINC release, and then, as was mentioned earlier, we needed additional information to break down the sub-parts. So Stephen Wagers supplied that file to us, and the next time that LOINC did a release, he was in the room with us, and we said, can we have an updated file? And 10 minutes later, there it was sent through to us, and that was very rewarding part of the process to be able to have that back and forth in a room together and work these things through. The other major part, of course, being the the map that had been started development in 2017, really. So the work that we've been doing for many years has been flowing forward. We haven't needed to reinvent the wheel at every stage. So the output of that process is a Google Sheet, which we'll look at in a second, has many tabs on it. And again, requests would come from any source, sometimes Reagan Street and sometimes internally. We said, could we see this, that, or the other, or some statistics and counts? So those were all applied fairly quickly. And in the initial pilot with 100 LOINC terms, we were able to use the Snowstorm API. So we would generate a concept and move on to the next one. When we tried to scale that up to 25,000, it would take 66 hours to run. So we needed another way of doing that. So at that point, we pivoted to using SNOMED CT archives. You can see that's the second output of that process. And to do that, you need to have SCT identifiers already provided to you. So the box there, the Component Identifier Service, or CIS, as we use internally, gives us those SCT IDs. So there's a sort of little iteration that needs to run there where we say, well, I'm going to run this, how many am I going to need, request that number. But because we run over and over again, I don't want to continually ask for more identifiers, so those sort of get cached after the first time we've run, and we use them over and over again. And this was a very iterative process, so I could run and just produce the Google Sheet, and quite often we'd discuss that internally in the team, and we'll have a look at what that output is. And then sometimes we'd say, well, we think that's good, let's go through and generate the archive and perhaps load it in somewhere. So we had one, about the fifth one that was produced, we said was good, and we formed that into a sub-ontology and put it into a sort of dev browser that we didn't publicize very widely. It was really just for people who were particularly interested to have a look at. And that showed up some issues, and then there was a 6th generation done, which very quickly was evident that it wasn't going to work. And so it was finally the 7th that is the version that you see today, and that Reagan Street are hosting on their own browser. So if I could have the next slide, please, Rory. Is that visible? There are sort of 7 tabs on the output spreadsheet, and the most interesting one there is the proposed model. And a column there, the second one, so we've got the LOINC number as the first column. The second one is something Ezra asked for. When we'd done our initial LOINC browser, that was the 5th iteration of it. And then we got to the 7th. Ezra asked me, well, which ones did we see last time, and which ones have you added or lost in this one? So there's extra column there to say what happened between successive iterations. And the FSN really was the thing that could be used for quality control, because it became very obvious quite quickly. If you have 2 prepositions next to each other, at, in, or something like that, something's missing. So it's quite easy to eyeball those. And then the SNOMED compositional grammar in the next column shows how that has actually been modeled. And Farzaneh was keen to see the original details from the LOINC release also. And this spreadsheet actually goes up to Z, I think, in terms of all the detail that comes through from LOINC is also visible. So the other tabs there, we have the first one is the summary. We have a count of how that map went, how many concepts we actually generated, and how that differs from the last time we saw them. So the previous iteration was another input to this process, which I didn't show in the diagram. Second tab was a LOINC detail. So we worked through the part map, and that subpart file really was the main driver for this process. The LOINC release itself was sort of informational. Beyond that, the file that Stephen Wagers supplied us was the main driver to this. So in that consideration, each LOINC part is listed, and then we say whether we have a SNOMED CT concept mapped to it or not. And that's the full set, so we sort of know what the future holds. The modeling issues tab would show you where we had a LOINC term that we tried to model, and then it was dropped out because we didn't have a part map for it. We would say in that tab why that happened, what was missing. And then so the proposed model is what we actually did. And then there was a map.me file, which, unlike the first tab, we showed everything in the LOINC part file. In the map.me file, we're saying, of the ones that I tried to transform, what was missing in that you now need to map. And something we were looking at was to give a priority for that, so to say, how many LOINC terms am I going to pick up if I map this one part? Because a part gets used in many LOINC terms. So if I add this, I could perhaps pick up 150 or 300 LOINC terms. So if we prioritize those, then we can see how much more we can get for doing very, well, comparatively little work. And we also took into account the ranking that Regenstrief themselves provide of their top 20,000 usage. So that priority was influenced by, if those are high usage terms, then they go up in our priority list. And finally, the import status, which is a sort of, shows you the SCT IDs that were applied for each LOINC term. And that was about it. So, Rory, I think you can move on to the next slide there. Are we? Oh yeah, next steps. So the next steps for us on the technical side of things. Currently we're producing Delta files, and every time I run this process, I get a complete Delta file set out of every concept. Now that those have been loaded into our production system, we need to change to a different way of working where we will still produce the full SNOMED concept modeled, but that will then have to be compared to what's already in there, and either create a new term or remodel or reterm the ones that are existing in production. So it's likely that we will move back to using the API for that, because the volume is likely to be much, much reduced. We are also looking at other code systems, and this process currently does not have a lot of abstraction in it. It's very specific to working with LOINC. So there is a sort of general set of rules of, I'm going to import some maps, I'm going to do this transformation, I'm going to create SNOMED CT concepts, and then I'm going to either import those or compare them to what's already in our production site. So we will be able to use that abstract process in other areas. The request for content for SCT IDs can be automated, and we also need to work out how this is going to work in terms of a sort of dry run. Because when an update comes through for the next LOINC release, our map is going to be missing items. So we need to run through first, find out what's missing, and then we have tools that can be used to maintain that mapping file, and we need to work out our process for how that then goes through into the next iteration when we actually update our content. Okay, thank you, Roy. That's me.
I'll just top and tail a little bit by saying, once the team's done all the hard work, then we basically put it into the terminology server, and then we put it through our release process. And in doing so, well, we classify it as well, which is something we don't do in the files. And going through the release process puts it through a lot of validation to make sure that it meets all the structural and logical constraints and rules in place for SNOMED CT. And then we produce the RF2 package, which you now can download from the preview site. Where we stand at the moment, and we call it an alpha preview very specifically. If we could get before alpha, we'd call it that. I don't know. An alpha preview, because the identifiers could change. This very much is a preview file that may well change. We'd like it to keep them going forward. This is just our normal way of working until we get to the production release. And when we hit the production release, then obviously we're into the normal SNOMED way of working. But at the moment, it's got an effective date. We haven't necessarily stamped it anywhere in the systems, waiting to get the feedback and see what people think. So I'm going to open the floor up to the technical questions. I wasn't looking at you, Rob, but now I'll go to fake it. Let's go. Sorry. Speaking to Jim.
University of Nebraska. I've got a question for Peter, I think, or maybe I don't know. Anyway, when we first deployed the tech preview and implemented it at Nebraska and actually used it in our data dictionary for our laboratory tests, our laboratory inventory, we found a few holes that, missing tests that we sought to fill. And that was my first education in the fact that the observables model that has been put forward by your committee, right, Peter?
It's certainly discussed in the MAG, yes.
Okay, all right. Anyway, the observables model allows for 4 different flavors of observable. And that's when I first learned about quality, process, disposition, and function. And, you know, frankly, it was a little confusing for me at the start. So I was surprised the other night to find out from Jim Case that, you know, what's been published so far is just quality observables. The processes that you described, are you dealing with all of the I guess I'm asking if you're constraining on just searching for, you know, those features that are intrinsic to quality, or is it that SNOMED has only been comfortable that the content review has been adequate in quality observables so far? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how this is, the ontologic model that, you know, evolved in the collaboration is elegant, now that I understand it a bit more. But it's also a big change from my experience with the LOINC committee, where I spent many years, you know, with Stan in dark rooms and things like that. And I'm just seeking to understand the process going forward as we move into areas that, you know, maybe are not some of what is the core LOINC, if you will.
Thank you, Jim. Well, we certainly had to select a group of like things, anything that matched those templates. Really, that was our selection criteria. Where we go next with it, we can certainly discuss. So in the code, there is a set. If we see things that can be used in that template, then we pick them up. In terms of items that are missing, if we don't have the part map, then the LOINC term will drop out, and we accepted that there will be some attrition. And that is quite likely a temporary situation until that map can be provided. And this is, I don't think we go as far as to say we've published this, have we? I mean, it's out there with caveats.
Well, it's published as a preview.
As
alpha preview.
Suzanne, would you like to say anything about the selection criteria for the LOINC terms that we chose for this?
I think in general, at this part of the project, we wanted to start with the kind of the most straightforward concepts from LOINC, and so the quality observables, the properties we could pick up and model with the 2 templates that I mentioned we created. We decided just to make it just as simple as possible at the beginning. You can see this was not simple, but to try to pare it down to the simplest, most straightforward for the starting point.
And that's been great work, and I want to applaud it and thank you all for all the time you put into this. But I guess I'm asking, is there any discussion about the process moving forward, or is there any forum for, you know, where those details will be discussed and worked out?
Can I just go ahead? The reason that, one of the other reasons we went with the quality observable was that in the first 100 LOINC code, there weren't much of the process observable. But definitely they are in the highly used terms, and when we get to them, we map them. Our next process, as everybody said before the break, is to look at the most used LOINC term in the laboratory domain and try to map them, and process observable are one of them. They are in our process document, but we don't, we exclude it at the moment. They're gonna be included as soon as we get to those.
If I may add, Jim, from the concept that we have initially started with, we were trying to see a test, to have a test of what it is going to go first and what is going to need more time to either research or come into agreement with. And therefore, the panels are not included. Calculation is still going forward to see the units, how it's going to be included, the fraction ratios, how it's going to be represented, as well as, for example, the answer list and the answers related. These are things that we are considering like second level. Maybe we have a third level of not only importance but complexity that we have to address from that perspective. So this release right now, it is just hitting the one that is, that okay, we can go with this forward, and then from that perspective, we can start hitting what are the complexity and how we're going to do it one by one going forward from that perspective. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to pass over to Feike now, who had your hand up, and then we'll come to Daniel afterwards, and then Rob, late.
So I'm going to be disappointingly predictable and ask 2 questions about translation. So first, I think it would be really useful for us to know which template has been used to model which concept. Would it be possible to add that as, dare I use the term, an annotation? And in case Dion is in the room, let me just quickly state that that would be metadata.
That's really interesting, yeah. Certainly the output of the Google Sheet shows it, which is no problem to share with you, but doesn't help with our sort of productionization of this system. Thank you. That's it maybe not a link to the template, but we could say some text that you would know what that meant.
Yeah, I think it might actually have broader applicability as well to the findings and the procedures, but that's for another day. And the second, I wonder if you could expand a bit on how you deal with those cases where the concept is primitive. How do you generate the FSN? Because you said in some, it depends on the LOINC part, whether it could be
right.
generated.
So the FSN has slots in it for each of the LOINC parts. Where a mapping wasn't provided, we would take the LOINC part name and insert that directly. And that was only something that could be done for certain slots. And then there was a little massaging that gets done, various words get removed, unknown, NOK, all these things are filtered out.
Like, for example, if you have if you have a long term that we just don't have the technique for, we still create it and we mark it primitive until we have the chance to create the technique and add it. So those codes are in there. But if you don't have the component, you certainly don't add it because it just says, I have done something to see what the concentration of this thing that I don't know what it is in the blood, which doesn't make sense. So components, some of the long part, if we didn't have a map to, we didn't create the code. But for some of them, like method, or if we have a challenge, a precondition, we created them and we marked them as primitive.
Right, but in those cases, you would add the LOINC part.
Yes. Yeah.
So it wouldn't be incomplete.
So FICA, something I'd be really interested to see is because we're programmatically generating the FSNs, you may very likely already have the parts translated. Could we form a template and use the Dutch part name to form a Dutch FSN?
Yeah, I think that would be, in fact, pretty trivial. So really great to try that. Yeah.
Daniel.
Now it's on?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I had a question about the LOINC parts. So where there are complex parts in LOINC, did you do anything with those for the first round of?
Is that where there's more than one row for a given part? Subpart?
Yeah, so
subpart two, subpart
I
two?
don't know the terminology, the LOINC terminology, but there is like caret symbols and pluses, and those who know more about LOINC could probably explain what that's called.
So I think the answer is very limited in this preview release. The only caret or subpart that we included was a challenge. So if the challenges in LOINC, we either map them to preconditions in SNOMED, or if the term didn't exist, then we would not include that map. But we know there's carets also for the super systems, if I'm saying it right. Yeah, we didn't tackle that yet in this project.
Me, before Jim.
There is one project that resulted from the point that we're mentioning is that in LOINC, we had in the component, in the LP part of the allergen plus the RAST method, they were combined, and that led to a project internally to go ahead and clean up that LP part component and separate it from the method, the radioabsorbent. So we have that separated, and it was quite a bit project, but it was a cleanup. Thank you.
So, yeah, and actually I'm looking at one of these examples. I think you did a really good job on these. Not everything, but but no, I'm, you know, like Keith, this is really cool. So my issue is that I expected to see LOINC part identifiers where you did them, where you're calling matches, right? Maps, I guess you're calling maps. So I'm disappointed that I don't see those. And at a minimum, then I think you need to surface that. So I think you were calling that the LOINC part map table. If I'm, and so I think you know, I don't see that available to me, and I think you need to make that available. I think that's a critical thing.
And we will. As I said earlier, I think we've focused on very much on. So these would appear in the alternative identifier file.
Sorry?
The alternative identifier file is the file that provides that equivalence between the LOINC thing and the SNOMED thing.
But we talked about this. That's literally those things are the really key. Again, you know, I mean, yes, you're treating, you know, you're using the word map, but in the context of what's been created, these things, those LOINC parts now are the same concept, right?
100%. It's a simple question of time that we hadn't done it. In all seriousness, so part of the work is, and this is what it's a question of Peter wrapping into the code that gets generated, is also adding those identifiers, the LOINC term IDs against the existing SNOMED concepts. Right. So you would have exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because that's what, I mean, you know, I'm going to push really aggressively to get that in order to do that document ontology work that we need. That's really what we need.
Aggressive. Yeah. No, I think it's, and I hadn't had a chance to tell Peter that your passive-aggressive question was coming. But no, it's something we could, I mean, we've got the data, we just haven't generated it. I don't know what you think, Peter. Have I just put you on the spot now saying, well, yeah, Peter's going to do it next week, don't worry.
I understood we had a problem that the same SNOMED concept as a part could be used in more than one place, and that there wasn't a one-to-one mapping we could do there. So we'd be more like it's in the context of the attribute where it's used that we would know what the LOINC part number was.
Both that and the definition status. So sometimes you use a LOINC part like a specimen, the specimen itself, just to define some primitive concept when you have other specimen or a specimen not otherwise specified. But if you have it mapped in a fully defined concept, then the correlation changes. The thing is that in the previous version, as I was saying, we had those information in one file that said this LOINC part is mapped to this SNOMED CT concept. For some of them is the total equivalent, for some of them is broader, for some of them might be narrower. But now we have all those information in the process document. So we do have the part ID, the part name, the SNOMED CT ID and the SNOMED CT FSN. But all of those other information are now in the process document. Whether the term becomes primitive because of some of the application or not.
But that's the really important stuff. I mean, that's literally what you need to be transparent about, I think. I mean, because that's where you're going to get the most help from the community, right? You're, you know, as my colleague says, you're doing the hard work, right? And so you need to spread that hard work out. You need to let us look at that and comment on it. I mean, anyway, I don't need to say more.
Jim.
I would like to pose a question for discussion of the scope of the project moving forward, okay? I'm not talking about the preview or the alpha. I'm talking about where we'd like to be from the standpoint of the SNOMED communities and the LOINC communities, you know, when it's done, you know. Anyway, and it's sort of along the theme of LOINC parts are not enough. And I want to phrase that by just, frame that by just relaying that, you know, in my experience with working with Daniel and the observables group over the past several years, I've come to appreciate that the scope of observables as it's implemented in the ontologic model, and I guess I want to be sure that we're all using that model going forward, or some variation of it, you know, that we discussed. You know, an observable allows you to define ontologically, you know, what it is you're observing, what feature or characteristic of that thing you're observing, what's the nature of the observation in terms of significance related to that thing, and then also, you know, the data type, whether it's numeric and that type of stuff. But those four features are within the scope of the model. And so, for example, for Scott's synoptic cancer project, you know, it was possible to actually begin to describe in the observable whether you were looking for information about the difference between metastatic spread or direct spread of a tumor, you know. Important stuff if you're doing research on cancer, all right? But I don't think you'd ever find it in observable, in you know, in LOINC parts. I'm sure and I know from personal discussions with Stan the other night, this is why I raised this question, of the notion of what is it that we're pursuing? You know, what is it that we want, you know, as a published body of work for the LOINC ontology, if indeed LOINC is going to subsume all observable entities, okay, for SNOMED, because that means Scott's work, you know, becomes part of the LOINC ontology, and I'm fine with that. I think a unified ontology is desirable, but I'm not sure if you talk to a LOINC purist that they would say, well, you know, we don't do that type of thing or whatever. So I just want to raise the discussion about what we're pursuing in all of this is the fulfillment of the observables concept model as it has evolved, including the scope of, you know, those function and process things and so forth, which certainly weren't in laboratory chemistry, you know, where LOINC started. And I think it's a question that is important for dialogue early on, at least based on, you know, my discussion with you the other night, Stan. I think it's a question in mind.
Showing green, is that, so, yeah, I just didn't talk yet. It's an important question. And what I would say is that we want to represent everything that is useful to people. The question in my mind is the separation between what you observed and then what you might be able to infer or other information. So for instance, I would argue that if in observing tumors in any way by genetics or by light microscopy or special stains or anything, there is no difference between the tumors that are liable to metastasize and not metastasize you know, we just represent what you observed. And then you have a bunch of knowledge that then correlates that observation to outcomes or other things, and that certainly should be represented, but I think it should be represented in a more, it's not represented in the definition of what you observed. It's related in a knowledge base and in a knowledge ontology that is based on experience and other things. It's a good topic for discussion, but it's the difference between saying, I don't know, I have to think of better examples, but you know, you observed the sodium concentration or you observed a blood pressure, you need to know exactly how that was done. You may need to know the context and the preconditions of that. All of those things are part of the definition of what you observed. How that blood pressure now relates to hypertension, how that hypertension relates to the risk of cardiovascular disease, to me that crosses a boundary into important and essential knowledge, but not part of what you observed. And that's probably where where you and I need to talk more.
But I think the talking needs to occur within the two communities.
It does, and we want everybody's input. I won't say anymore. I'll get in trouble.
Matt.
Just a quick one about allocating whether concepts were defined or primitive. Was that a manual process, or were you able to develop some heuristics for that?
Gosh, no, we were trying to do absolutely nothing manually. This is a straight transformation of what's in the LOINC release into SNOMED CT. We don't add anything, we don't change anything.
But
yeah, that's a switch in the code. If we didn't have one of these parts, then we mark it as primitive.
We also had a list of kind of keywords. If they were included in a part, then they would also be primitive. So for example, if it was an NOS or unknown or unspecified, something like that, that wouldn't be allowed in SNOMED and wouldn't be considered something that we would include. So we had, Peter added a script for that. So if you saw one of those words, other and other leukocytes, anything like that, then the concept's primitive.
Maybe a clarification between Stan and Jim. Agree with both, and yes. So to one extent, and I'm just going to use the cancer synoptic approach and then see if there's a correlate. So Stan's exactly right. When you look under something, a piece of tissue under a microscope, and you see that this little ditzel this cancer is gone from its home and it's starting to grow and set up shop in another place contiguously, the pathologist notes that, hey, the tumor, I'm seeing this tumor in both the prostate and the periprostatic region, and I can actually trace the trail of breadcrumbs. So the measurement there and the observable is there's a presence of this tumor in the periprostatic tissue, and it's characterizing, the way we're looking at this, is characterizing contiguous growth. So it is absolutely an observation that the pathologist observed, but it also characterized something that was really fundamental, which was this thing was growing contiguously. Versus I see this piece of bad in a lymph node, and that had to grow metastatically. And so I observe it as a pathologist that this bad is in the lymph node, but because I see this tumor in the lymph node now, it's characterizing a metastatic process that's begun. So that's what Jim, Stan's absolutely right. It is what we observe, but it also tells us something about what we're observing. And I think that that's where Jim Campbell was starting to go, is, you know, I'm not a clinical chemist, I don't pretend to be one, I already struggle to be an anatomic pathologist, and I faked that one pretty well. But what is it that on some things, what are we really, what's the underlying thing we're measuring? Because all of these have a process, or some things, not all. But for example, antimicrobial susceptibility to an antimicrobial. Well, what's the process, right? We can say it is or it isn't susceptible, or it's indeterminate, and we use an MIC method or whatever. But are we saying anything more about that? And I think that's what maybe Jim and Stan are kind of wrestling with. Is there an underlying thing that's being represented in the observation? Not necessarily the conclusion, but is characterizing some fundamental physiologic process that is bigger than just the measurement. And Stan, does that help? And Jim?
Yeah, I think, again, to really get to this, we need to talk about specific, not talking generalities, but talk about specific things and what we would do and how we would handle it. And I think it's important to think about, and this comes into conversations, that what Jim and I were talking about was not chemistry or what you can see under the microscope. It was, how do you represent mental and behavioral health questions? So when you talk about what you're measuring for serum sodium, we can say fundamentally what it is. We're talking about the number of atoms and whatever. We can say that at some pretty much precision. If you ask a question about whether you felt sad or depressed one or more times in the last 2 weeks, I see an interminable discussion about what I'm measuring by that question, because it's not measuring one fundamental thing typically. It's measuring many. And so because it's measuring many, that's not a defining characteristic. What you know is the question you asked and how they answered it. What that fundamentally measures, I have a really hard time figuring out how you're going to say all of the things that might measure, as opposed to what you did and what you observed. And so, I mean, I think there's a nuance between that fundamental, what am I measuring, versus what did I observe. What we're capturing is what we observed in the observable. So that's, I think that.
I'm out. I'm just
yeah, sure.
No, I'm buying tickets now. This was just
Go
on. And actually that was about bedside clinical observations of the patient in coma, if you recall. It was the Glasgow Coma Scale. But I think the point I'm trying to make leads towards what we do with those observable concepts. Back at Nebraska, when that sits as an individual fact in a vast sea of facts, okay? And the fact that, the patient spoke in response to a verbal stimulus is an important bit of information about that result and what its significance is for my clinical community, okay? Which is arguably the function or process of feature that patient was able to manifest that day as observed by the clinician. Long way from clinical chemistry again. But the point is, we're using observables and LOINC codes as metadata in our data dictionary, in that vast sea of data in our data warehouse, both clinical and laboratory and genetic and all kinds of stuff, and how to figure out what's in, what folder do I look in? That's where the computability of observable entity and the model that's been created in the concept model, you know, is a useful indexing system because it's got all of those features. What it's about, what are you observing, what's the nature of the data, et cetera. And I think my concern is simply that we continue to keep our eye on the goal of allowing the data warehouse manager to have a tag that's something other than a number. Whether it's got a dash in it or not, I don't care. But the point is, it's got information, it's got ontological definition of what that data is about and what its significance is.
Okay, last one. Go, Daniel.
Okay, I also participated in the discussion. That was on Friday, I think. I think we had a large agreement about a lot of things, and one thing being that the number of episodes of sadness, or what was the, I don't remember the details, but something like that, is not an observation about depression. But it is though an observation of sadness. So, but there could be multiple ways of making observations about sadness, perhaps using different like questions. And in a terminology like SNOMED, one of the features is that we allow the aggregation of different ways of, and for some purposes that might be valid, for other purposes it might not be valid. So we need to represent both that concept on the level of the way that it's implemented in a specific instrument, but also be able to aggregate. And in order to aggregate, we need to represent what is this question about. So I think we need like both levels in order to achieve what we usually want to achieve by using SNOMED. Thank you.
Any more questions? Cool, more.
There it is that on? Okay. So coming back to the existing preview that we're looking at, is there a specific roadmap for enhancements to the different parts that are going to take place within the current release that's out? Is my first question.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what the future is in a couple of minutes, but we're we're a bit of a crossroads about where we go. 'Cause there's so many things, as we said earlier, that we could do in LOINC, so many things to tackle. It's, do we focus on trying to get as much of the top 20,000 we can? And in doing so, as Peter said, it's about the more things we have mapped and works for the templates, the more that we pick up. So that's kind of the initial ongoing road right now, plus waiting for feedback from the preview.
Like within the primitives where there were multi-part components, like with the carroted items that Daniel brought up. Are there any of those items that you've already identified that are going to be fixed as part of this initial release before feedback is submitted? And then the second question would be, as feedback is submitted, is that being surfaced on the website so that people don't resubmit feedback for the same items?
It will be, yeah. And I think it depends, like with any preview or feedback process, depends on how much feedback we get and how quickly we get it or don't get it, to whether there's a subsequent previews, basically. So.
But to answer your earlier question, John, no, we're not planning on fixing anything right now. The preview is the preview, and now we're going to accept feedback from it. We had quite a scramble in the last few days to get it published, and we did fix a number of items, but we're sort of done for the moment.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next part, which is just a question we had last week. So we put a couple of slides together about how do we see requesting content working in this world. I know this is very much from a position when we have a production version of the extension, you know, if you're using the LOINC extension and you want to provide feedback or get more content in there, how do we do that? So Isa and I have put a couple of things together just to talk through how this would happen. And it really generally depends on who you are, which community you use, and what you're using. So I'll start with, yes, LOINC, or yours.
With LOINC is our usual request process. We have not yet dig into the details of this whole workflow from perspective of request, how it's going to happen. It is something that we're going to discuss going forward. But the question is that if there is something that is pressing right now and it has to happen, then the regular request process that we usually follow in LOINC is going to be applicable. And we have it whether using the online portal or by email. And either one, it will get to our team, and we'll start looking through it. And definitely, we're going to be in touch with the SNOMED team in order to see what is that we're going to be landing on from perspective of going forward with the requesting of any new concept that's going to come through. If there are some edits that requested, we have also a form that's contact us. That's also on the same website. We didn't have the chance to implement it in this slide yet, but definitely is going to be in the package that we're going to distribute with the team.
Yep.
Thank you.
So kind of the overlying message is that if you're a LOINC user today, nothing changes, essentially. You basically submit any request, as you do now, into LOINC. So then it's what happens if you're a LOINC ontology user. So when we have the first version out there and there's content that's missing or you want to be improved, how will we do that? Again, the requests go via Registry. The discussions we have, part of the governance that we've mentioned, we'll be building a joint team that looks at these requests coming in and decides how it gets done. But ultimately, as we keep on saying and underlining, this is LOINC content, this is Registry content. We're just observers and providing maybe some input into it. So, for example, here it says if the content's already in LOINC, but it's not in ontology, we would just see why it's not in ontology and see if we can get it in. If it's new and relevant to LOINC, then obviously that goes into LOINC and then it would be generated the next time we publish the release. If, and this is an interesting one, it's not necessarily relevant to LOINC but might be to SNOMED, then it's something that we would look to include in the international edition because it's a request that's come from somebody who needs it. So we're keeping essentially keeping all our options open, but primarily any content that's missing from the LOINC ontology will come through Registry and the process that Isa was just talking to. And then the third use case is SNOMED users who are not using the LOINC ontology, of which there will be some for quite a while. If the content's already in LOINC and we have an agreement and the joint team agrees that this is relevant, that content would be promoted to the international edition. Now, that promotion would be the full model. It would not include the LOINC identifier, but it would include everything else that is part of that particular concept. So that's how we would deal with those scenarios where content is needed by, generally in SNOMED, in SNOMED community. If two members ask for the same piece of content, then generally we know we need to have it, and that's how we'd work through that process. If it's new and relevant to LOINC, we would still work with the joint team to see, we need to get it into LOINC anyway because it's something new that's been identified by the SNOMED community that needs to go into LOINC, and similarly, like before, it gets generated, appears in the LOINC extension, but we would probably see to how we then promote that to the international edition. I'll put a little NB in italics that depending on the timescales and when this appears in the cycles and the urgency, it may well be initially put into the international edition whilst waiting for the LOINC release to catch up. But if the content's not relevant to LOINC, then no change. Content goes into the international edition per the existing process. So a lot of words. I tried to put a diagram together with some nice pastel colors, but it kind of gives you an idea that really we see that people who are using LOINC ontology or LOINC users straight to Registry and follow the process that's there already. And the joint team works together to see, does it have a place higher up in the international edition, for example, or not? And we work through from that point, agreement about promotion or not promotion. And the underlying message we're trying to get to the SNOMED community who may not use the LOINC ontology is that you can still make your observable requests that will get into the international edition. we're not trying to say all observables only now happen to LOINC ontology. It's just that we're leveraging the skills and the SME expertise in the LOINC community that we don't necessarily have. So, very quick run through content release. And again, this is just the first stab. You know, we haven't got a production release yet. So once we get the production release, we will then. Well, that was a bit late. Welcome to recording. You missed the fun bits. Oh, okay, that's good. All right, well. So yeah, so again, this is a work in progress. We'll see how this goes. And we'll see how many we get. We don't really know. This is going to be a bit of a, it's a bit of a new world, really. So we'll see. So, but this is the idea that we are thinking of at this point from both organisations. After that, we've got a future roadmap. So I can see Jim and Stan. You could do it from the table if you'd like to. No need to come up. So, future roadmap. Go. Stay here.
I can take the first shot at this. The idea, you know, this is ongoing, if you will, and some of these things we've mentioned before. We're going to analyze the feedback and, you know, correct things as appropriate. We already talked about, you know, LOINC part to SNOMED concept map. So, I mean, that's the key to consistent representation of the semantics across the two approaches. So, we're going to continue to do that and expand that. As we get into other areas, that'll become even more important. So, having said that, so there are kind of those things that we would do, that we need to do. One, and I would distinguish sort of particular domains that we're pursuing versus, if you will, sort of technical solutions for a given thing. So one of the next things we want to do in terms of a technical thing is we want to really implement a solution for how we create value sets and how we attach value sets to concepts. That's key for us to do a lot of the laboratory things, and it's absolutely essential too as we move into clinical observations. But talking about domain things then, what we'd like to do is complete laboratory observables, including coded laboratory observables, and then decide on any modeling of high-use laboratory terms that we need to, so that we can get in all of the things that people are using, and that would move forward, for instance, with what we've said about calculated values, other things like that. Then we would get into clinical observables, document ontology, modeling and terminology for imaging, and then further automation of the import and export of the things. Now, it goes back, when I say document ontology, that's sort of like, I think, when we would, the order where we would see document ontology codes actually showing up now in a preview version or something like that. We want to start document ontology work now, as mentioned earlier, because that can go on independent of what we're doing with laboratory and other things, because it's an entirely different ontology. Mostly a different set of people who would contribute to the creation of that ontology, and then but this is where I think it would come, when we actually would start translating existing document ontology concepts into the SNOMED extension. So that's, I thought, Jim, you want to correct, enhance?
No correction.
Okay.
No correction, just a kind of enhancement. And one of the things that we have to recognize as we move forward in this process is that neither of these standards are static. As each of the standards evolve, then we're going to have an ongoing maintenance process that's going to have to go on in parallel along with the continued development process. So part of the governance structure and part of the entire process structure that we have is not only the addition of additional areas of LOINC into the extension, but the ongoing maintenance and updating of the content that already exists in the preview and the future paths. So So there's a lot of ancillary work that goes on more than just the initial development process itself.
I think the thing I'd add also is that we don't want to do this in isolation, nor in any kind of ivory tower. This is where, I think I said earlier, this is kind of breaking new ground, because we don't have many SNOMED systems that do laboratory observables, nor do we have any lab systems that do SNOMED. So who's going to use this and how they're going to use it is going to be an interesting kind of place to be. And that's going to drive whether we focus on clinical LOINC or the document ontology. It's getting feedback from all of you, how you'll start to see you and your own stakeholders, where are they going with this? What do they want to see next? We honestly don't know, and that's why it's quite an exciting kind of fun to see where do we go next. And I think we're looking to pick up the obvious ones. I mean, to the one that we keep on coming back to, it's panels and answer lists, and we've had some thoughts about. We started by talking about using attributes or actually using a map from a concept to a reference set and other kind of fun things. But when we come up with those kind of models and approaches, we'll definitely share that with the rest of the community to get your feedback on what's the most easy thing to do. It's always great by using reference sets for answer lists, but somebody said there are thousands of answer lists. That's a lot of reference sets to maintain. So maintenance is the challenge, and just iterating what Jim said, we've created a new product we have to maintain, and that's okay, which is why we really are focusing on automation. If we can't automate most of this, we won't be able to maintain it, and it won't serve its purpose. So that's really the focus, and where the team does an amazing job to get us to that point, and we keep on growing those templates, growing the parts map to where it is not quite push button, but near off. That's where we want to get to. And all that should be shared, so there's no reason why other people can't look at that code and run it locally if they were interested. So we shall see. Okay, sorry, go one question. Go for it.
Oh, thank you. Quick question regarding roadmap future. Obviously, these 25,000 terms is huge progress. 25,000 LOINC codes is a huge progress. But obviously, these are, although voluminous, these were this half of the LOINC lab codes was the easier part to model, I think. As the process proceeds with more complex mapping tasks and modeling tasks, is a couple questions. One is, what will happen with LOINC codes that cannot, because of the way they're defined, cannot be mapped? And secondly, related to that, is there potential, or is this part of the plan down the road for the LOINC mapping, the Reagan Street LOINC mapping of certain tests to be changed, to be updated in order to allow them to be mapped? So one example is, that I can think of is, like for some molecular tests where the method, instead of the method actually being a method, it's a sensitivity of the test. So, fewer than 100 organisms per high power field, whatever it is, are detected. That's the value of the method. So even though maybe the other LOINC parts can be mapped correctly to SNOMED concepts, that particular one probably is not a valid technique in the SNOMED hierarchy. So I guess using that example, assuming it's a valid example, will concepts like that just not get mapped to SNOMED, or not get included in the LOINC ontology? Will they be included as primitives, and thereby the other defining parts will just be discarded? Or will the modeling of those concepts such as that be changed in LOINC in some way? Or is there, I guess the more general question is there any plan to change the modeling of concepts in LOINC in order to accommodate this process down the road? Thank you.
Yeah, the answer is yes, on both sides. In other words, if this is a collaboration, if both parties agree these things are observables, and there isn't a place for the information in the current observables ontology, we'll enhance the ontology. On the other side, and we have examples of this already that we're aware of, two things. there, as you point out, there are things that say, you know, there's, especially with antigen and antibody tests, LOINC codes that say confirmatory thing versus a screening test. Well, it turns out in reality that's not part of the observable. What you did is you did this, you look for DNA by this particular method, or you look for something else. And what was the you know, I think the example that was given is, you know, there were other ways, and you confirmed the test by mass spectrometry. Now everything, the screening test is now mass spectrometry, so that has no meaning. And so we would change the LOINC approach to that and say that's not a valid, you know, that's not a valid representation any longer. And so we would change the editorial policy in LOINC relative to that item. So it can happen on both sides. And so there should be nothing that we both agree is observables that can't be represented.
Okay.
I have a question about the roadmap and the development roadmap and the relationship to the submission new request process. You know, there was two streams, SNOMED stream and LOINC stream, presumably going into this consolidated process. What does that say to SNOMED community members who have active projects and observable content that they're working on for their installations today, if in fact, you know, the material lies 3 years down the road for the development roadmap? What do we do now?
I would say you do what you do now. As in you put it in the local extension, or it's a part of the international edition. I mean, I think to the roadmap, there are purposely no timelines on that roadmap because we don't know how big or little these things are. And this is the world we will never please meet everybody's requirements. So I think at the moment it doesn't change for either community. The way
yes,
that we
it does,
work stays the same.
It already has changed it. You know, when we've gone to Jim with requests about discussion of the social determinants observables, for example, or you know, neuropsychological observables, all of that is on hold pending the consolidation with LOINC. So, no offense, but you know, we would like to think about not having our work held up for several years.
And agreed. Anything that starts with no offense, but I think. But the reality, though, is, yeah, correct. But that's the same today. And it's an important point to make. The LOINC extension work is a very particular piece of work with the Regensreef team that is not necessarily linked to the rest of the wider world and SNOMED community. There are people in the SNOMED community who are never going to use the LOINC ontology, but they're going to need this content. This is what I mean by it doesn't change ultimately, because they will collide. They will not collide. Oh, that sounds rough. They will merge eventually, as a point of view of the content may well come from the LOINC ontology if it's not being used by people want to use it elsewhere outside of LOINC. But ultimately, at the moment, it's a separate product. It's an extension of the International Edition. It's not a replacement, nor intended to be a combination of the International Edition in any near future.
But those projects will be diverted to their place in the roadmap, and that's the way it is.
In the LOINC ontology. This is not a product roadmap for SNOMED International Edition.
I guess that's part of my question. You know, will SNOMED continue to support observables development, you know, in the interim, and then converge that, I guess, at the proper point of the roadmap? Or because from what I heard from Jim, I didn't think that was true.
So nothing that we're doing in the LOINC ontology work prevents anybody from creating observables in their own extensions. At the same time, much as we did with the last LOINC agreement, is if there are multiple member countries that require an observable to be created, then we would certainly work in concert with Regenstrief to either get that concept into the LOINC release files themselves, or if that was something that they deemed not within their scope, then we would add it to the international release. And so it's really a member-driven aspect. We anticipate that there's a lot of that work that would not be unique to SNOMED, that Regenstrief would want to adopt it, much as the work that Scott did on his synoptic reporting. All of that content that we added to the international release, we've supplied to Regenstriefs so that they can look at adding it within the LOINC release, so then it becomes part of the source of truth files that we would use to create the LOINC extension. So there's everything that we're going to be doing is going to be collaborative in that sense, but it shouldn't stop anybody from proceeding in observables work that they need to do within their own communities.
Okay, just moving on to the last sprint. So I'm just going to hand over to Shelley, who's hiding over there, to grab a mic. Just a bit about where we're going with the community and to wrap up with this. So over to you, Shelley.
Well, thank you, everyone. Great discussions. For all of you that have asked tons of questions and gave tons of comments, you do know that we were recording. I'm sure there's people taking notes. We will commit to come back to you when we do the next updates, even for those people that perhaps don't have the time or the capacity to be involved as these move forward, is to kind of say, you recall at this last meeting, we talked about this, here's what we decided, or here's how it got handled in the discussion, so we'll try and give you feedback. With regards, I want to just add to Jim's question around the observable stuff. We are not going to hold up our customers, our members, so let's have further discussions. I know some of that stuff's been on hold for a while, but we'll talk further about how we get things moving, because we don't want to hold up the work just because of this project. So I encourage everyone to take a closer look at the preview and provide comments. And it would be useful, and I think Confluence will allow it, or the website probably you've set up will allow it, is to put your comments in there so other people can get talking about the same thing, so we have a real fulsome discussion around it. As was mentioned, we're going to set up a governance structure, and was mentioned steering committees and stuff, but we're also going to set up the working groups and who can get involved and how do you get involved. So we're going to the next stage. You know, if you want to be part of that, let us know. And you can register on the website of how you do that and how you get involved. And trust me, we want you to be involved, i.e. working involved, doing stuff, helping us, because we don't have a ton of people to do that. So we will be looking at consolidating some of the working groups that we have from LOINC, as well as what we have at SNOMED CT, but that doesn't stop any other organizations from joining those working groups. So, you know, if we've got the CAP or whatever, please join our working groups. We want your input into this as we move ahead, and we encourage everyone to do so. So I'm so excited that this was such an engaged and energetic session. Everybody seems really passionate about the work, so I think that tells us we're on the right road. And I'll just throw it over to Marjorie if you have anything you want to add.
Nothing to add, except we need your involvement is critically important. So thank you, everyone. Is this closing the session?
Thanks very much, everybody.